Okay, so there are nothing that left that I have to teach in trigonometry, except there is one section in the book that they are talking about the applications of trigonometry. So I would think that it would be a good idea if I choose one problem from the book, because there is nothing that I can teach you here. I want to improve your experience about solving these kinds of problems. I give you a little bit of time that you can think about the problem yourself first, and after that I will come back and try to solve this problem, and then this lesson is finished. So then from the next section we continue to the next chapter. Okay? Uh, is that okay? So this is the problem. Of course, I understand more or less what is going on in the problem, but I don't know Swedish. So you can read this is problem. I don't know, for some reason, I think they consider this a level 2 problem. There are no level 3 problems in this part. So I want you to read this, and I think you need definitely calculator. If you have your calculator, you can use it. Otherwise, you can use GeoGebra to do your calculations, okay? So, okay, I think, yeah, in principle, 25 minutes or half an hour would be enough, more than even enough to solve this problem. Okay, so I wait for you. Any questions you have here? Okay, try to solve this problem. Now, before you start, let me tell you something. By reading this question, so could you yourself expect that if this equation was not given to you, could you expect that trigonometry somehow is involved in this problem? I don't probably, this is the depth of the water, probably in a lake or something. Let us talk a little bit about the tides, yes? So probably you have some experience about tides, so the level of seas goes up and down. But this happens during the day, yes? So I mean the next day, it repeats itself. Is that clear? So this phenomenon of tides, this will repeat itself during some time interval. So this somehow means that you are facing a periodic phenomenon. So if you want to model a periodic phenomenon, a phenomenon that repeats itself during some time interval, the natural model is to think about trigonometry, because there are three famous functions, sine, cosine, and tangent. All of them are periodic functions. So it is not actually very strange that these kinds of models, that they are repeating themselves. For example, in physics, you have studied wave equations, and the wave is something that repeats itself, yes? And then the function that you are using there was probably you have studied is a sine function or a cosine function. And of course, you also expect that it should be sine and cosine, not tangent, because tangent, even though periodic, but it is not continuous. So there is some strange things happen when you get to these discontinuities. But nothing very strange happens, you know, when you look at the tides, the level of the sea goes up and then it smoothly comes back. It doesn't go up and suddenly drops. Yes, this is discontinuous behavior. So this is why it is not far from expectation that these kind of models are somehow related to trigonometric functions, because they are periodic. And the most famous periodic functions that we know in mathematics are sine and cosine functions. So whenever you want to model something which is periodic, it's always good to think about trigonometric functions. Yes? So that's why I would say that even if you read this and the equation is not given to you, if this phenomenon is going to repeat itself, it is better to model it using trigonometric functions. It is not really unexpected. Yes? Okay, but then the rest of it you can start working on it. I don't see it's a reasonable model or not. Let me first tell you my objections. First of all, tell me, have you seen tides somehow, or at least you have seen them in movies or something? Yes. How many times a high tide happened during a year, during one day? Yeah, it's 2 times. Yes. The reason is we have the tide, actually, so for example, if this is the Earth and there are some oceans level, this is a very, very crude model, and this is the moon, so the gravitational attraction of the moon will attract the waters of oceans toward the moon, okay? So the part which is closer to the moon is pulled to the moon, so this is the ocean level, and the other part, which is more far away from the moon, will have less attraction, so you get some kind of, this is a very, very exaggerated picture, so you will see the bulge of the oceans. So these are the high tides and these are the low tides. And if you just rotate, so the people who are living in one part of the Earth will actually 12 hours later will go back to this situation. So the tides will happen 2 times during one day. Yes? So if this is to be our model, so what do you expect for the period of this model at least, if this is going to be reasonable? According to what I described, every high tide, or correspondingly every low tide, will occur 2 times during a day. So can you tell me what will be the period of a model which is supposed to describe this phenomenon? No, the period here is in hours. It's just a practical problem, yes? So how many hours will be the period of such a model? Because the period that I was talking in mathematics, that is for mathematics. But now this is real life and this is the physical world. So if I ask you, what is the period of the rotation of Earth around its own axis, you will not tell me 360 degrees, yes? You will tell me 24 hours. So 24 hours is the period of that revolving rotation. That rotation, the period of that rotation. Now I'm asking the same question. What is the period of this phenomenon of tides? 12 hours. Yes, it should be 12 hours. Now let us see if that's a reasonable model. So let me write the model here. Y is supposed to be the depth. For some reason they have measured plus 3.5 and then they have written something like this: sine pi multiplied by t minus 1 divided by 6. So this is something, by the way, people, scientists or whatever, they have actually measured the height or the depth of the lake in different times and try to find a curve which best fits to those points, yes? And then probably they have come up with this very simplified model of that, because they cannot measure infinitely many times. Yes, they have to do some samples and then try to sum. For example, if you get some kind of these points during different days, yes, then it is reasonable to think that this might be a good idea if I use the sine function to model this phenomenon. Yes, that's something like this. Okay, but let us see what happens. If I ask you what the period of this function is, mathematically now, let us to see that is it a good and reasonable model, because from what you see in reality, you realize that this phenomenon has to have period 12 hours. Okay, let us calculate the period of this function. Hopefully they have done it right, because otherwise it is not a very realistic model then. Yes? So how can I find the period of this function? This is not in this question. I'm just asking extra questions. So what is the period of this function? So do you remember we had in mathematics, we had this y equals to capital A sine b of x plus c plus d. If I ask you what the period of this function is, you know that this is 2 pi over b. If you compare this with that function, this is exactly the same thing. The only difference is that because of very natural reasons, they have replaced the variable x from x to t, because this time t is representing time. So it is more natural to denote it with t. But see, if I ask you what is A is this number sitting here. And what is D? D is number sitting here. And what is playing the role of x? Probably t is going to play the role of x. So in order to answer the period, I need to know b. So I just rearrange this a little bit so it fits us our mathematical model. So if you don't mind, let me write this one first because I want to fit everything with this model. So 3-point comma sine. So I multiply pi inside, it becomes pi t minus pi and then divided by 6. But then it becomes this divided by 6, which is what? Which is pi over 6t minus this divided by 6. So this is another way of writing this. So I would write pi over 6 times t minus pi over 6 plus 2. Yes? So now if you compare this one with this one, everything is understandable. If I ask you what a is 3.5. What b is pi over 6. X has been replaced for natural reasons with time, which is a better representation of time. And then c is minus pi over 6. And what is d is positive 2. Yes? Now, if I ask you what the period is, what do you answer? The period, according to the formula, is 2 pi divided by b. But this number is playing the role of b, so it's pi over 6. And then it becomes 12 pi over pi. Yes? And it becomes 12. What is the unit? Because t is in terms is time and it is mentioned in hours. Yes. Yes. T. So it's hours. So it is 12 hours. So at least from this perspective, it is a reasonable model. So the period of this function is 12 hours. These are, by the way, not related to the solution. I'm just asking these questions to understand things deeper. But one thing that I don't like about it, do you also see that there is something strange about this model that I was thinking a little bit? Yes?
How can the level be minus?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think they have been careless in designing this model. Yes, didn't. Because at some point in time, this why? Because I don't know, this depth in Swedish means a positive value. Yes? Is that right? Because displacement in physics could be positive or negative. But the distance always in physics is the positive, regardless in which direction you move. So if I understand, the depth is also a quantity which should always be positive. So if I ask you, by the way, what is the amplitude of this function? What's your answer? What's the amplitude of this function? Yes? 3.5. But what is the maximum of this function? What is the maximum? Yes? 5.5. Because the maximum part of this is 1 times 3.5, but I'm also adding 2 to it. Yes? But that is, again, that's the problem. If I ask you what is the minimum of this function, what is the minimum? You have to replace this with minus 1. And then put it here, it becomes minus 3.5, and then minus 3.5 plus 2 is a negative value. Unless this model is only for 24 hours, not beyond that. In that case, might be this will not actually reach to this minimum because, so for example, I am telling you what is the minimum. The minimum is negative, but of course, the period is 12 hours, so it means that yes, in one day I have 2, so it goes up and down. So at some point this depth becomes negative. So that is why a little bit problematic. Yes. Do you understand what I mean? Because if this is going to be the depth cannot be negative. But at some point it becomes negative. So anyway, let us try to solve that problem. At least the first part, I don't think it depends to it. At which time in the day probably it is better to go and collect shells? So which time do you go usually? Yes?
Isn't it when you put y is minus 1.5 and then see what they intersect in each time?
Okay, but how did you brought 1.5?
Because it's the lowest point. I just know that the lowest point is minus 1.5, so if I put both of them and then see where they intersect.
Yes, you mean that you put it equal to, you want to minimize this, that is what you are saying, yes? So it is better But of course, if this is a little bit, I don't know, because then the depth at that time is negative, then I don't know. But let us forget about this, so if we can get the correct answer out of it. Well, I agree with you. If you want to go,
Because the answer is 10 and it sounds easy.
okay, but okay, so in this kind of question, you understand if you want to go and collect shell, it is better go during the time the depth is the lowest one, yes? The lowest one is actually, so you want to minimize that. Okay, to minimize this, it means you need to ask yourself at which time this number is -1. Yes, sine of pi over 6t minus pi over 6 is negative. Yes, or as you said, put y equals to -0.5. That's the same thing. Yes.
Isn't it better if you go at the start, because it will be low tide, or like the depth will go from 0 and then negative and then up to 0 again, and then
No, the depth is not 0. So by the way, that's also a good question. Where is, so when it is midnight, t is how much here according to what you read in the problem? When midnight starts, it's 0. Yes. So if you put 0 there, what happens? It becomes minus pi over 6. Sine of minus pi over 6 is minus a half, and then you have to divide this by -2 and then add to this. So it does not start from 0. Yes.
no, I just mean that there will be like an interval of time where there is no like water.
Oh, that's very strange because this doesn't happen in reality. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, I put it into GeoGebra,
Mhm.
and then there's an interval from like 8 to 12 where there is no water at all, and then it's actually negative. Then should you not start when it's at 0? Then it goes like this under the graph.
I will also come back to it, but I mean, if as soon as we don't have any, I will also show it on GeoGebra. That's a good idea. But you think that this is not reasonable, or what?
Yeah, I think we should. I think at least that maybe it should be when it's just 0. From the moment it's 0, because then you have the like maximum amount of time to collect the shells.
I don't think they want to ask that question. Yes, I was thinking that they want to minimize the depth.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, let me solve this one to see how it works. Okay. If you want to find that one, so what is this angle? Sine is big. I told you that whenever you have 0, 1, and -1, even though you can still use the formulas, but it might be easier to go to the unit circle. So sine is -1 is here. So what is the answer? So it means that pi over 6t minus pi over 6 should be this angle. This angle is minus pi over 2, yes? So this becomes minus pi over 2 plus 2n pi, where n belongs to z. Yes? This is the only solution because I want to make sine equals to -1. Then I move this to the other side. This becomes positive pi over 6 minus pi over 2 plus 2n pi. And then I simplify this, pi over 6 minus pi over 2 if you take the common denominator. So this becomes negative pi over 3. Yes, because this becomes 2 minus 6 divided by 6, which is -4 divided by, no, sorry, this is 1. So if I want to calculate pi over 6 minus pi over 2, I take the common denominator 6. Yes, this is 1 times, this is 3 times. So this becomes -2 pi over 6, which becomes minus pi over 3. So that's correct. And then plus 2n pi. But I'm looking for t, so I multiply everything by the reciprocal of that. I multiply by 6 divided by pi to find t. So then t becomes what? If I multiply this by 6 and then divide by p, it becomes -2. Yes? And then it becomes 12n. So I am multiplying everything by 6, it becomes, so let me write here. If I multiply everything by 6, it becomes pi t. On the right hand side, it becomes minus 2 pi plus 12n pi. And then I divide everything by pi. This pi is cancelled, it's minus 2. This pi is cancelled, it's 12n. And that's what I have written there. Yes? So this is time. But of course, you get infinitely many answers because it's a trigonometric function. But you have to start extracting the acceptable values. So t is time here in this physics problem. Problem, t cannot be negative. Okay, so and then n is an integer. So if I put 0, what will happen? It becomes negative, which is not acceptable. If I put negative values, the situation becomes even worse. Yes, because it becomes more negative. I want to find positive values. So the first value that I can put is what? 1. When I put 1, then t becomes what? 10. Okay? I don't know what the answer is, but if this is what they mean, the first time that this happens is 10 o'clock in the morning. Yes? Because the first time that the depth is the shallowest possible one, this is 10 hours after the experiment has started. But according to the problem, they started from the midnight, so this 10 means 10 hours after the midnight. So when is better to go and collect shells? 10 o'clock in the morning, yes? Can you check the answer? Is it right? So probably they really mean this. And if they really mean this, then they have some flaw in the calculation. Or at least I don't understand something. Because this cannot be negative. I can also go back to GeoGebra to see what you say. Okay? But at least this is I mean, I also think that is good, but the only thing that I'm saying is that they have to choose this number a little bit higher than 3.5 so that it makes sense. But still I don't understand, you see, because in this model, if I went 24 hours, it means that I have 2 cycles. So this has enough time to go up and come back down. So it means that at some point it really becomes negative, which is not acceptable from my perspective. Yes, might be they mean something else. Yes?
Can you explain why you chose n to be 1?
No, I have to choose all values of n. From mathematical point of view, all values of n are acceptable. But if I choose, for example, negative values for n, then I get a negative value for t. But in this problem, t is time, and it starts in the midnight, so I will not go back to see what happened in my history. I want to go to the future, yes? So this means that I will not go for negative values. Then I put 0, still it's negative. Then I put 1, then I get 10, which is acceptable. But of course, I can also put 2. So this means that if you lose to 10 o'clock in the morning, then what happens? You can go 10 o'clock at night. Because the depth will still be minimum.
Okay.
So, but they have mentioned the first time, I think, or no? Vilken is the plural or not?
No. Singular.
Singular, okay. So this is also not probably correct because there are 2 times. Might be, of course, I prefer to go in the morning, probably. We can see what you're collecting. But anyway, if you lose 10 o'clock in the morning, 12 hours later, the depth will be the same as 10 o'clock in the morning. So if you really just care about the depth, either you should choose 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the afternoon after 12 hours later. Because if I put 2, then what happens? It becomes 24 minus 2 is 22. 22 hours after the midnight is 10 o'clock in the afternoon. Is that clear?
Yeah. The thing I'm wondering, why don't you use the amplitude in the calculation?
Why should I use the amplitude?
No, I'm confused there. Why?
No, you see, don't forget about this. This is your depth of the lake or whatever, okay? if you want to see more, because if the depth is big, is larger, then most of the water will come to the shore, to the sea, and the shells will be under the water. But if the depth is lower, then the seashore will go back towards the sea, and then you have a bigger beach in front of you. So then you can collect the shells. So this means that you have to minimize y. Then when I want to minimize y, I don't care about amplitude. I ask myself, my goal is to minimize y. What I am supposed to do to minimize y, this amplitude is a constant number. I cannot tamper with it. I cannot change it. 2 is also a constant number. What is at my disposal to fine-tune y to be minimum is to make this part minimum. And I know that this is a sine function. The minimum possible value of this sine function is to make it minus 1. Yes? Okay, but okay, but part B is also answered, yes, isn't it? Can you translate it for me? What is the first time that water starts going back, or something like that?
Exactly.
Okay, so what is the answer? Okay, it should reach to maximum, yes?
So 1, right?
Because when the water starts going back for the first time, the time when it has reached to its first maximum, yes? Because if the water hasn't reached to the maximum level, it will continue go up. It will increase until it reaches to its maximum, and after that there is no bigger values to come in. Then the depth should start decreasing. So I think in this question they are asking you about what is the first maximum. Is my interpretation correct? Yes. Do you feel that? Because what is the meaning? If I understand the Swedish correctly, it means that when the water starts to draw itself back for the first time after the midnight. Yes, is that correct translation? Okay, so what happens then? So it means that if the water starts going back after the midnight for the first time, it means that it reaches to its maximum, then it cannot increase more. After that, it will also start going back. So this means in this way, indirect way, they are asking you about the maximum point, if I understand it correctly. Yes?
So you put the sign value equal to 1.
To 1 this time. Yes? Do you agree with me? Okay, let us check. Okay. So this means that this time I put sine pi over 6t minus pi over 6 equals to 1 this time. And then what happens? I calculate the same thing, but 1 is up there. So this means that it's pi over 2. So then I would write pi over 6t minus pi over 6 is equal to pi over 2 plus 2n pi. N is an integer. I will do the same thing. I move pi over 6 to the other side. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees. Pi over 2 is 90, so it becomes 120. If you write it in radian, it becomes 2 pi over 3. And then I have 2n pi. So remember, I moved this to the other side, I calculated the sum, I wrote it here, and then I multiply by the reciprocal, so then it becomes what? 4, and then it becomes 12 again n. Let us double check everything. So I move this to the other side. Yes, that is correct. And then I multiply by 6 and then divide by pi. When I multiply by 6, 12 divided by 3 is 4 pi. Then I divide by pi, it's 4. I multiply, it becomes 12n pi. Then I divide by 4. That's correct. Yes? Okay, if I ask you at which times we are a minimum, if I choose a negative value, it is not acceptable. Mathematically, it is acceptable, but physically, it is not acceptable because it gives rise to a negative value for t. So can I put t equal to 0?
You mean n equal to
Yeah, n equal to 0. Yes, I can put that. So if I put 0, By the way, t becomes 4. That's acceptable. So this means 4 hours after midnight, 4 o'clock a.m. Yes? Can you check the answer?
Yeah, it's
Is that correct? Okay, so this is important. By reading the text, you need to understand what is the meaning. So they are asking about maximum and minimum in a very alluded way, in a very indirect way. Yes? Is that clear? Okay, so let us just, as Tina proposed, let us go to GeoGebra and see how it works. We can understand the problem there as well. Might be we can solve one more problem if you think now you understand things better. Okay, so here, let me just change a little bit here, show grids only major lines, and then let me switch to radians. Distance, let me make it pi over 2, probably it's better. Yeah, it seems good. But I will try to draw the graph here, so it is y equals to 2 plus 3.5 multiplied by a sine, and then let me open a pair of brackets, and then I have pi. I just typed the same thing more or less, pi and times t minus, okay, I think it doesn't accept t. Let me just put x if you don't mind. X is playing the role of t, and then I go down and then divide it by 6. Am I right? Yes, so this is the graph of the function. So if I zoom in a little bit, but of course, don't get confused. This pi over 2 should be expressed in hours. So 3.14 divided by 2 hours after midnight. Something like that, yes. Yeah, this is the one. So you see that when we start the experiment, we are here, 0. So that is the height that we start. So I mean, this is the depth of water, yes? So according to this, you see when time goes on, so this increases up to some threshold level here, and it starts going back. So here what we calculated is the minimum possible value, which does not appear today. So if you start your experiment today midnight, you have to wait until it goes back here, which is a little bit unreasonable, because in that case you need to jump into a valley, yes, because it's going under the ground. It's a little bit strange, but still the answer is yes. I mean that they made a little bit wrong model here. They have to be a little bit careful here. Yeah, they didn't care. They cared about 12 hours. That was reasonable, because if you just randomly write a sine or cosine function there, yes, and the period is not 12 hours, it doesn't match your imaginations, yes, because or expectations, not imaginations, because that's exactly what is happening, yes. Every 12 hours you will have a high tide. Okay, so that's good. They thought about this one. I don't see why they have written it here, because this is the depth, and at some point it can be negative, because 24 hours is still beyond that threshold, yes. Yeah. So, of course, your model might be better, but it might be very complicated. I don't think the answers are different, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, you could maybe interpret it if you want the book to still be correct.
Yes?
That dip below the graph, that maybe everything under there is just 0. So then there's a time like when it's 0 for an extended period of time, because that's more how it is in nature. It's not like it goes in and exact like directly.
Yeah, what I'm saying. But I mean that you cannot say that this is the model for 24 hours. Then they have to mention it in this way. This model until this time in the day, and after that it is flat or something like this. But when they write it in that case, in this form, it means that this is following this model at least for 24 hours. That's what I'm saying. Okay, at least you have some experience now. I don't know how much time we have. I think it would be a good idea if we can choose one more and then try to solve that. This time I think you can solve it yourself. Okay, so let us go. Yeah, I think let us also solve that problem. This problem 2364. No, there is no way that I can do that. Okay. Yes, here. So please read the question and this time try to solve it yourself, and then I will come back and try to do it together. But the questions are of this type, so you need to read and then try to interpret it in the language of mathematics and then be able to solve the problem. Yeah, is my understanding correct? This is probably this one. Assume that you jump from here, and this elastic band will actually accompany you until some threshold, and then you stop momentarily and start going up. If I understand, they are asking about this height, yes? From this, so this is the height, because you start from this height somewhere, and then they are asking about this height according to this model. If this band, rubber band, is actually following this model, then you want to answer this question. What is y here? Y is the height and t is second in time. Okay, so height, I would say that, so y is this one. So this you can also call y, but this is the y for that particular moment of time. This is the height also. So yeah, I mean, you are supposed to find y, but the minimum value of y actually. So this is the way. By drawing this picture, you will realize that in the first part, what they want is the time, or no, they just want this height. The question is extremely simple, by the way. You really don't need to do calculations at all, yes? You want to find this minimum height. The height follows this rule. You want to minimize the height. So you have to minimize this function. But this is a constant part. You cannot tamper with that part. You cannot touch this part. So this is only at your disposal to minimize. So when it happens, this is minimized when cosine 0.8t is what? Minus 1. So I would say that part A of the question, indirectly, they are asking you to find the y minimum. So this means that this would be 32.5 plus 28 multiplied by minus 1. And then if you calculate that, it becomes 4.5 meters, yes? And can you check the answer?
I actually don't have to put.
Okay, is there,
Yeah,
okay,
it's-
okay. Isn't that, okay, so this is 4.5. Okay. But where is the equilibrium point here? I mean, because this will oscillate around some point. So the amplitude of oscillations is this, but they are going up and down around this height. Yes, that's the meaning. So they will go 32.8 plus 28, but of course that would be higher, and then you go to this minimum level. Yes, that's correct. But what is the second part? How long does it take? Can you translate for me? How does it take that this happens? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So how long it takes that you reach to this one? So this one is even simpler than the previous one, because you understand what I mean. You want to see how long does it take you reach to this level. So what should I do? Then the question is that I have to put this equal to what? Minus 1. Because the minimum value is this. When this minimum value is achieved, it is achieved when time satisfies this condition. And then I have to calculate this. And I told you that when you have 0, 1, and minus 1, even though you can use the formula, it is better to use this trick. So here, minus 1. Cosine is the x-coordinate. It is supposed to be minus 1. There is only one single point, and that is here. So this means that 0.8t should be what? Should be pi, but not only pi, 2n pi should also be added. And then n belongs to z. First, you solve it mathematically, then you adjust what you need to do for this problem. So I have to get rid of 0.8. I divide everything by 0.8, so it becomes pi divided by 0.8. And then I have 2n pi divided by 0.8. 8. And then I will simplify it because 0.8 is 8 over 10. It becomes 10 over 8. And then if I simplify it, becomes 5 pi over 4. This is also the same. So 0.4, 10 over 4, 5 over 2. This is not pi, this is n. If I have done it right, then this is the answer. Yes, that's correct. 2 divided by 8 is, yes, that's correct. Yes? And now I want to calculate the time. Of course, have they mentioned for the first time or something, because this will oscillate up and down, yes? So what is that? If I want to reach to this one, I put 0. Can I put negative values, by the way? This is also important because sometimes you should be able to put negative values. Because when I put negative values, is still the whole thing might be positive. So you should be able to, you should make sure that you also consider that into account. So can I put a negative value here? What is 5 pi divided by 4? So I have to calculate it. What is that? 3.93 or something like this. Okay, so if I put negative 1, it is still acceptable. Because even if I put negative value here, it is minus 2.5, but when I add it here, it is still positive. But negative 2 is not acceptable. So the first value is when I put negative 1. So this becomes 5 pi over 4 minus 5 over 2. So if I simplify that exactly, then I can put it in the calculator or GeoGebra later. So this becomes 5 pi minus 10 seconds. This is the first time I reached to this. I don't know if they ask the same question. That is of course another time, yes? If I put 1, then t becomes what? 5 pi over 4. No, if I put 0. If I put 0, this is the time. If I put 1, I don't know. You can continue this list because this is also a periodic motion, yes? But I don't know which one they mean to answer here. Can you translate it exactly? What is uthupet there?
It says like after the trumpet, so after the jump. So it means the first one.
Oh, after the jump. The first one. If that's the first one, then the answer is the first answer. Okay. So now I have to put this in GeoGebra. Let us see to do some approximations here. So if I go here and calculate 5 pi, 5 times, okay, I have to put pair brackets first. Okay, 5 times pi, and then minus 10, and then I go outside here and then divide it by 4. So this shows 1.43 seconds. Can you also check the answer?
No,
It's not that?
it's 3.9.
That is very strange now. Have I done?
Answer though.
Pardon?
That's our answer. If we look at the answer isn't just the first, it's the second.
It's a second answer.
Yes, but they
Might
never
be the-
should ask about the first. We got it from 5 pi.
No, I hope that they haven't been careless when they wanted to calculate. Because usually you put 0 first. But this is not the 0. Because I am trying to look at these t's. This is the answer, you mean?
Yeah.
So let me check that one as well. It is 5 times pi divided by 4. Yes? This is the answer. 3.93.
I think it's when n is equal to 0.
Yes, but that is not what I expect. So for example, if I go back and try to draw that graph, the graph of the function, of course, this number, so y is equal to 2.5, and then I have plus 28 star cosine function, I put 0.8, but let me put x instead of t. GeoGebra takes that one for something else, and then I draw that, and then I come back here and so let me make it a little bit better. Oh, sorry, the other way around, sorry. I rescale it even a little bit more. Okay. So this is the graph that we see here. So when we start the experiment, the height is this much, yes? And that is reasonable, the sum of these two numbers. And then it goes down until it reaches to this level, and then it turns up. Okay, the number that I have, so let me see, where is, now it doesn't work. Okay, so if I write a 5 pi over 4, I want to see where is it, 5 pi over 4, and then 0. So let me see, where is it? This is this point. So they are right. This is the minimum. So why did I got the other ones? No, but that is a little bit strange now, because this minimum,
Du löser det själv?
Ja, jag vill dubbelkolla. Jag tror jag gjorde det fel.
Okej.
so let me see what that point is. 5 pi minus 10 over, so let me write a point B. 5 pi minus 10, and then over 4, and then 0. So where is that point now? This point is here. So I don't know why I have got this. Now this is very strange, because might be I have done something wrong in my calculations. Do you see where? Because you see, it is clear, this point up there is not still the minimum value. Yes? It's clearly not the minimum. So I have made some mistake somewhere. Can you see the flaw? So we want to make cosine of this -1 so that it becomes the minimum value. But then this becomes pi plus 2n pi. And I divide everything by 0.8. It's also 0.8. So that is correct. That's also correct. Yeah, that is very strange. So, because it is not consistent, I was a little bit worried about mathematics, you know. So here, I forgot to put pi, because this cannot happen if I do something consistently, and I realized that this answer is really wrong. Because when I checked it, it didn't give me -1. And the reason that I got the answer wrong, because I was careless and I forgot to put pi here. Because I am dividing by 0.8, thank you very much. And it didn't play any role here, because when I choose 0, it doesn't matter if pi is there or not, it is just drops. Yeah, now everything is correct. So this answer is wrong. When I put n equals to -1, this becomes -5 pi over 2, which is acceptable, but negative. Because 5 pi over 4 is smaller than that, it becomes a negative answer. So it becomes minus 5 pi over 4, which is not acceptable because t is not negative. So the first positive one is that one. Now it is reasonable. Thank you very much. But that was my mistake. Otherwise, if you do mathematics consistently, it shouldn't make any problems. Okay, anyway. But I don't know. I think there are some questions in the book, I don't remember exactly, that if you start with 0, you will get the wrong answer because you have to check the previous ones are really negative. If the previous ones are still positive, you have to consider that as the lowest one. Okay? This is important. And for example, if you have sine functions, as these numbers are not famous, then you get two equations. Do you remember plus or minus? We have to put plus or minus. Then it means that you have to consider the plus sign once, the negative sign another time, and then see which one generates the first minimum value. So you have to consider both of them. Anyway, so the only thing that you need to understand in these problems is to read the text and try to model it in a mathematical way so that you can use your own mathematical knowledge to solve it. But otherwise, there is nothing new in this lesson. Okay, any questions? No? Okay, so this long chapter is finally finished. So from the next time, I will start the derivatives. Of course, I will try to start from scratch, but if I want to really start everything from scratch in Math 3C, then we will not have time to finalize this. So might be every now and then I can refer you some of my lectures and videos. If you think you really don't understand my lectures because your Math 3C is very weak, then you can go and refer to those videos, okay? I will try to start from scratch, but it is not possible to cover everything in Math 3C in Math 4 as well. Okay, thank you very much.